We've been really fortunate in the Toronto community to have Ash Moria come by a few times, participate in events here at Mars and also others in the community, and I think a lot of people have taken to the lean canvas as a key tool in going through their business development process and really reflecting on the experiments that they're crafting. Is that something that you use? I'd be curious to know. How do you reflect on the lean canvas and other canvassing kind of approaches?
I appreciate the question. I don't use it. And it's not because I think it's bad. It's that I don't really understand the problem that it solves. Mm-hmm. Part of it is I tried really hard in my book especially, but just in the work that I do, I try to be strategy agnostic. Like 90% of entrepreneurship books, if you read the first chapter is about how to pick your idea or how to figure out if you have a good idea.
Yeah.
Right? Am I right? Yes? And I remember as an entrepreneur, every time I would pick up a book that started that way, I would put it down and be like, I already have an idea. Like, I don't care if you think my idea is good or not, because like, what do you know, Mr. Strategy Expert? Like, screw you. Or like, I think more commonly, if I'm being really honest, I would be like, yep, this strategic analysis proves my idea is brilliant. Right? No matter what, even when my ideas were actually horrendously bad. And my experience working with entrepreneurs is I have never, even one time in my whole life, successfully talked an entrepreneur out of their idea. And I get pitched some bad ideas, okay? You gotta understand. I hear ideas that violate every rule of strategy you can imagine, that like are incoherent, that don't have the pieces, don't line up, the parts are contrary, just are a mess. Mm-hmm. And I've tried a million times to be like, let me explain disruptive innovation to you. Hear me explain how with this, you're in the wrong segment. You can't kind of be both high volume and high margin. All the things you know, like, waste of time. So what I decided to do for my work is to say, look, whatever you think your strategy is, let's just go test it. And you can represent that strategy however you want, Canvas, disruptive innovation style, you could do it IDEO style. I'm agnostic. It doesn't matter because it's wrong. And it's wrong not because of a theoretical error in abstract reasoning. It's wrong because the facts on which it's based are wrong. So let's go find out what the facts are and then we can work accordingly. So yeah, I've kind of stayed agnostic and neutral in the Canvas wars. The only contribution I think I've made to the question of business models is going back to innovation accounting, I think that if we're gonna have entrepreneurs model their business using an abstract system, it should be a quantifiable system. We should be able to look at a business model and say this one is better than that one, objectively speaking. We should be able to say this person is making progress. Mm-hmm. And most of the canvases that people show me are just storytelling devices. And so it's like I gotta, as I change my business over time, I'm telling a better and better story, says me, the storyteller. And like, that's not good enough for me.
No, that's great. And then, certainly your new book, the Lean Startup, has done a lot in better contextualizing the methodologies. And, I'm sure a majority of the people in the room have read it and understood and reflected on some of it. But, who is the book not for? I mean, at what point in time, is this not the right opportunity to pick up on the Lean Startup?
You can't ask an author a question like that. Every person should read my book at least 10 times, but you buy 10 different copies.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's really hard to tell people not to read your book. But I do think it's important to be clear that all ideas, there's no such thing as like a general purpose good idea. My favorite interview question for a long time was, tell me a best practice, from your industry or something you know really well. And they'd be like, you should always, do test-driven development. I'd be like, excellent. Tell me a time when it would be inappropriate to use that best practice. And most interview candidates cannot answer this question. It's like, what do you mean it's a best practice? It's like, it's truly best for all time, every circumstance. You should always use it without exception, no matter what. And most people are like, well, I never really thought about it, and I don't care. I just know to do the best practice. I'm like, great. I don't want to hire people like that because I know what's going to happen. They're going to come in here and they're going to tell me their best practice, and like, if it doesn't work, it's going to because of my fault, because I wasn't best enough in the practice, and so they're never going to be able to make any progress. So I think it's important to be able to think about that. And the way I think about Lean Startup is think of a 2x2 matrix of on one axis the level of market uncertainty that exists in a given industry. So you come out with a new automobile, very low uncertainty. It's very clear. You can forecast demand. It's no problem. You have a brand new social network you want to introduce. To compete with Facebook. It's like, no one has any clue if that's going to work. So from low uncertainty to high, and you can imagine in between different industries or different places. And on the other axis, you have what's the underlying cycle time of the business in question. So, airline engines and car, like a lot of durable goods, it's multi-year development cycles, very slow-moving development process. And at the fast end of the spectrum, we have places that you can do continuous deployment and 3D printing and all these kind of cool new technologies that are driving cycle times down. So that upper right-hand quadrant, any good consultant, when you make a 2x2 matrix, the upper right-hand quadrant is the golden zone of lean startup, where we combine high uncertainty and fast cycle time, because we have high uncertainty means we have the opportunity to benefit financially from running a lot of experiments, and fast cycle time means we have the capability to run a lot of experiments. So when I meet with like corporate executives and stuff, I tell them about this, and they're like, "Excellent, my business is in the lower left-hand corner, so get the hell out of my office." I'm like, "Hey, that's cool, because everyone's always like, first people are like, this is a bad idea. The next stage of grief is, this is a great idea for other people to do, but obviously it could never work for me. And you wouldn't believe the ludicrous reasons I hear from people why, sure it works for so-and-so, but it never worked for me. In that stage, I'm always like, that's cool, no problem. Let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine that both of these axes were a treadmill. What direction does a treadmill run in? Like in the world that we live in your industry, do you feel like things are getting more or less uncertain? And then people are like, uh-oh, right? Because nobody's like, oh man, life is getting easy. My business is settling down, it's getting easier and clearer, and I face fewer competitors, and technology's going slower, and everything's just chill, and everything's the same. Like, no, come on, that's ridiculous. Even supposedly safe industries are getting screwed by massive new uncertainty. Then I'm like, okay, in your industry, are things getting slower or faster? Right? Are new versions of your product coming out more frequently or less frequently? Are the competitors who release more frequently doing better or worse than the ones who do less? It's like, uh-oh. Right? So like both of these axes is a one-way ratchet towards more uncertainty and faster cycle time. So that this like golden zone for lean startup is also kind of like a black hole as it sucks more and more and more industries into this area, because the same underlying forces are at work screwing up everyone's cool industry, safe, simple, like it's all the semiconductor revolution. As we go, from we make one industry after the next autocatalytic, and the technology becomes exponential, crazy shit happens. And so for our colleagues in big companies, this is like the source of massive heartburn, because even if your business is fine today, for all you know, any given day, someone's got a Kickstarter campaign with the thing that's going to destroy your whole industry running that day. Like it could happen any day. Yep. If you were making like digital watches, like you were fine until like 2 weeks ago, and now you're totally dead. Like, oh my God, right? So that's just going to keep happening and happening. It's going to happen more and more and more and more. I was just thinking about films, because like Kickstarter has been like a huge like crazy thing in the arts. It's like, oh my God, there's this whole new. So things can change very quick. Anyway, so for our colleagues in big companies, this is a source of heartburn. For us, this is like opportunity city, right? It just means that even if whatever you're working on right now fails, like for every like one thing you try, there are 10 more opportunities being created every day. And so every time you just like, if you ever need an idea, just like camp out on Kickstarter and wait to see like whose business is about to be destroyed by some random guy in a garage. Be like, let me go pick on that guy for a while. Why not? I mean, that's what's so amazing about this time. So we have to get everybody. Intrapreneurs, entrepreneurs, garage, we got to get everybody, policymakers, investors, private equity, everybody celebrating this as an opportunity rather than seeing it as like, a source of stress has to be destroyed. Because this ain't going nowhere. It's just getting worse. So we may as well get good at it.
Well, I think it's clear now that it's not voodoo magic. So.
Thank you.
A great jumping off point to turn it to you guys. I think we've got some good time for questions. So hopefully there's some good considerations in the room. Throw your hand up if you've got a question for Eric.
Best thing is to stump the whole audience. Oh, so close.
Sorry, go for it.
Sure.
Oh, do we want to line up? Is that?
Go.
Okay, please.
I'm just going to bring up your point about the innovation accounting.
Yeah.
And how you're saying about a quantitative way to pivot. I guess my question is, if you have quantitative way, but you're in a very uncertain environment, when you reach that confidence level that you need to make that pivot, and I think one of the problems that you see with startups is, as you said, a lot of people say, "Oh, I wish I would have pivoted earlier."
Yeah.
And therefore, you need a really low confidence interval to make that pivot. So I guess that's the give and go. How do you address that?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. It's It's really irritating. This is a really annoying problem, which is that everyone's always convinced that they're like one iteration, one release, one test away from mega success. And it's one of those things. You can never disprove that hypothesis. Like maybe one more thing will do it. So the best we can do is just get everyone in the room who's arguing about the pivot to agree on the facts. If you actually sit and watch entrepreneurs try to decide whether to pivot, the problem is not that they can't agree on what success looks like. The problem is not that they can't figure out what the new direction is. The problem is they can't agree on whether the current strategy is or is not working. I mean, it's amazing for two people to sit in the room and one person's like, things are going great. The other person's like, it's a disaster, we're about to die. It's like, one of these two people is clearly wrong. Probably both of them are wrong. But these are people who live and breathe the same information. They spend 24 hours a day together. They consume all the same data. How could they possibly not agree on the facts? And the problem, of course, is this is, all goes back to vanity metrics and the bad accounting systems. When we do vanity metrics, we ultimately get to live in our own private reality. Because we get to enjoy when the numbers go up, it's because of the thing I was working on at the time, and when the numbers go down, it's because of what he was working on at the time, right? So it's somehow seasonal effects always make numbers go down. You never walk into a board meeting and be like, our numbers are all up and to the right, but it's not due to our work, it's because of seasonal effects. I've never heard that. Never once in my whole life I heard an entrepreneur say that. I can't tell you how often it's like, well, we would have been up and to the right, but it's seasonal effects, right? It's always how it is. So the real challenge here is actually just to get people to agree on the facts. Because when you agree on the facts, an amazing thing happens. If you do real cohort analysis, like we went through a period at 6 months at InView where we were looking at daily cohorts. Okay, so we would pay, $5 a day on Google AdWords. In those days, you could buy as many clicks as you wanted at the bottom feeder price of 5 cents a click. So every day, 100 clicks means 100 human beings come to our website. What percentage buy something from us? Okay, and day in, day out for months, it was 1%. 1 out of 100 would buy something. Now, this is months in which we're practicing continuous deployment. So we're making the site better every day, multiple times a day. And I'm the one trying to defend the status quo that things are working. So I'm just like, no, it's fine. We just got to stick with it. Our gross numbers are all up and to the right because we're adding 100 customers a day. And, we get network effects and become viral. And just, some of those people stay and they keep using the product. So if you look at a vanity metric like total number of messages sent, it's like, whew, to the moon. But every day, the X-ray shows a cancer is growing in our business, which is that we're making the product better, but the conversion rates are staying the same. So actually, from our customer's point of view, the product isn't changing. But we're making the product better every day. Those two ideas, you cannot hold both those ideas in your head at the same time. Either the product is getting better every day and customers agree, or they don't agree, in which case the work that you're doing every day is a waste of time. Now that is not as the head of engineering, you don't want to be the one to be like, oh yeah, everything that me and my team is doing is all a waste of time. Gee, that is psychologically something that we are all prepared to defend ourselves from, and yet that was the case. And it was only because we had this stark black and white fact that we could stare at that it became evident that we had to do the pivot. I mean, that was the only way we could have done it. Because I'm really stubborn. And I don't give up ideas easily. And I had to be bludgeoned with that information continuously to do it. So
Great.
Hope that's helpful.
Okay, random out of left field question. Do you think any parts of lean startup apply to government? Do you think governments could take, or do you think startups and governments are, I was thinking about uncertainty and cycle times with the treadmill and.
Right, yeah, right, exactly. Oh, thanks for that question. It's actually not as out of left field as you would think because, again, when I first started talking about this, I didn't think that this would be used by anybody. I certainly was like, oh yeah, the Canadian film, the hell do I know? But I certainly wasn't like, yeah, I'm sure this will be used in governments too. But I said this at PwC this morning because I was thinking a lot about it. I had just added this as a footnote in a slide. That's really all it was. It was like, look, here's the definition of a startup. By the way, a weird observation, hey, funny little tidbit. The definition doesn't seem to have anything to do with the size of your company, industry, or sector of the economy. So in theory, should work fine in a big company, should work fine in a government, nonprofit, shouldn't matter. And I had no clue what I was talking about. I didn't know if that was true or not, but of course I was on stage. I'm a professional expert, so I'm like, lean startup is applicable to all industries, all sectors, all size companies, like asterisk, I hope. And I figured, but I didn't think anybody would care. I was like, no, only people I'd ever talked to about it to that point were VCs and venture-backed startups, okay? That's it, 100%. So I had no idea about it beyond that. And from that very first day, people have been coming up to me to be like, oh yeah, I have that problem. I'm an entrepreneur and I work in, and I'm like, what? Crazy thing X. So I'll tell you a story. Actually, I haven't told the story before. I was at, we were talking about South by Southwest where those t-shirts were, that was so embarrassing. So the person I was meeting with, who I was really embarrassed about, was the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. At the time, his name is Anish Chopra. President Obama was the first American president to appoint a Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. government, which being one of the largest developers and procurers of technology seems like maybe not the worst idea, somebody in charge of it. And I had this meeting, and Tim O'Reilly, who I'm sure many of you know, arranged this meeting. He, Anish, and I had breakfast, and it was like 7 o'clock in the morning at South by Southwest. Okay, so Tim O'Reilly and I were not doing that well. We got drag ourselves to this meeting, and we're just like, oh, what, who's going on? But Anish was on government time, which is basically 24/7, is there in his suit, and he was amazing, and he wanted to know how could they apply lean startup in the federal government, and I was like, I guess you could kind of this thing, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, minimum viable product, that's part of it, we already do that, and I was like, come on. What are you talking about? We had this amazing conversation. He was talking about all that. He outlined a list of things they were going to try to do in the coming year, applying lean startup to government. I came away from that meeting super skeptical, whatever, okay. He seems like a nice guy. He works for the president, so I can meet with him whenever he wants, and no problem. I shook a hand that shook Obama's hand, so I'm pretty excited. But beyond that, whatever. Now, 1 year later, so we just had South by Southwest again this year, and we did a lean startup track that day. And that morning, I arranged a breakfast. Tim O'Reilly was not present this time, with the new Chief Technology Officer of the United States, Todd Park. He'd just been appointed that day, Anish Chopra, and I brought Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, who was speaking at my event. And we had a meeting. And in that meeting, Anish and Todd walked Scott, who was pretty skeptical, through all of the lean startup things they had done in the previous year in the government. And it was amazing. I mean, I rarely get this experience in the private sector, to meet with someone who says, we're going to do the following things in the coming year, and then actually does them. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And then the stories that they told were absolutely incredible. And I remember walking out of that breakfast with Scott, and he was like, are these guys for real? And I was like, let me tell you a story. A year ago, I had breakfast. It was the same thing over again. And what they have done is systematically, they started in the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees all the federal healthcare programs, the new Obamacare initiative, all that stuff's all run in that seems like massive division. They also run Medicare, which is the government-run socialized medicine for seniors. So it's Center for Medicare has $1 billion budget. I mean, it's just this massive government bureaucracy, and they have gone through, new products they built a new website called healthcare.gov, which is the first time Americans actually get information about the healthcare industry and what plans are available to them. All this information was a 90-day lean startup. I mean, they gave it 90 days, and they had clear metrics, and they put out the MVP, and they keep iterating it. They have some amazing data transparency initiatives. And the story that blew my mind the most was the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, the regulator for new medical devices. They had this huge problem, and you won't be familiar with, if you want to bring a new medical device to market, it has to be government approved as safe. And the application and approval process is a nightmare because it's this massive government bureaucracy, and all the regulators and examiners are in this horrible situation where they get horribly penalized if they make a mistake. So if they approve something and then somebody dies, it's the worst thing ever. But if they just delay indefinitely, nothing bad happens. So it's if you face those incentives, what would you do? It's take a small chance of the worst thing possible happening, or 100% chance of something fine happening. You're like, well, I'll take the 100% chance of something fine. So these applications just linger forever. And they said, all right, we're going to create. They have a program at HHS they created called Entrepreneurs in Residence. And they're now rolling this out across the entire U.S. federal government, where departments have to apply. They bid for projects where they're going to pair a team of internal entrepreneurs with real, regular entrepreneurs from the private sector who come together. They form a lean startup. They get 6 months to build and deploy something new. And FDA said, we want to create a new alternate pipeline for medical device approvals that would be expedited approval with the same level of quality assurance. and we're going to do that in 6 months. And I remember I heard about this when they were first starting it because they wanted me to advise. I was like, I can advise you, but that's hopeless. Give me a break. Come on, the FDA, like new medical device. And they did it. They actually built a team. They in 6 months, developed, piloted, and validated this new program. And there's now this new beta pipeline. If you want to apply to have a medical device approved at FDA, you can choose. Go through the old, horrible, like, disgusting bureaucratic process, or do the new streamlined beta program, you know, which should you choose? So like, it's been really successful. And Todd Park, who's the new CTO, he told that story on stage at South by Southwest, and the crowd went nuts. Because people, I mean, when I told people I was going to have this government bureaucrat on stage to present at a lean startup conference, that you should have seen Twitter. People were like, you sell out. You know, government guys kissing the president's ass, yada, yada, Obamacare, this. You know how people are in America about politics. And then after he talked, people were just like, their mind was blown. They're like, this has changed my life. And a lot of people, what they said to me was, I was incredibly moved because I thought, Jesus, if he can do that in the government, at Medicare, what's my excuse again? And I know my company's like political, but like, it's not Obamacare political. Like, come on, people, like that is a hard problem. So anyway, I think listen, I was the last person to think that this would actually work, but it does.
That's great. Phenomenal. Please.
So you have mentioned that your book, Lean Startup, is in and of itself like an experiment. And so as you travel around the world and you are meeting new entrepreneurs and observing new things, where has your thought process kind of moved into in terms of interesting observations where you might go with, say, the next version of your book or things
you're
that
trying to kill me now. Jeez. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just share with us kind of your early thoughts, like just unedited stuff that you're noticing that you are processing right now in this experiment of yours.
No, I appreciate that question. It's hard. I've taken in so much raw data in this tour, which has gone on way longer than I ever imagined. I mean, I never thought I'd be doing this with you guys, you know, months after the book came out. I thought it'd be long done by now. So it's like this, I feel like I've been in minute 15 of the 15 minutes of fame, like for a long time now. It's like, when's overtime? Like, when's this gonna end? I don't know. So thank you. I'm getting more and more interested in not just reform of how startups are built, but reform of the whole ecosystem of entrepreneurship, which sounds a little grandiose, but it's actually, like, I mean something very specific. And I'll give you a few kind of tangential thoughts, and you can see if they come together. The first is, if you think about all the people who are leaders in the entrepreneurial ecosystem today, the most well-known investors, the most well-known thought leaders, and you ask yourself, why are they famous? How did they get rich? Where did the money come from? Who anointed this person an expert? And you walk backwards, you will find a very funny pattern. Almost all of us made our money because some bozo MBA overpaid for our startup in the past. It's incredible, this pattern. It's like, the number of people who sold a company to AOL or Yahoo, like, that was worth, you know, sold for $1 gazillion, it turned out to be worth 25 cents. It's like a lot of people. I mean, it's a lot. Or, you know, dumped a company on the public markets that, like, after they got out, all the other investors took a bath. I mean, it's just a very common pattern. Because, like, that's how the money that flows into the entrepreneurship ecosystem is dispersed by people who run pension funds, people who do biz dev at megacorps, and like the dumber they are, the more money they spend. And like, because they keep spending money, they keep like blowing, you know, $800 million on a startup that's worth nothing, and that's not supposed to happen. So that's actually not good. Like, I mean, listen, as the beneficiary of this system, I've certainly done fine, and you know, many of my best friends are very, very wealthy because of this phenomenon. But like, why would we want AOL biz dev MBAs deciding who should be the future leaders of the entrepreneurship ecosystem? Does that actually make sense to anybody? And then you ask yourself, did those guys ever even like take a class in entrepreneurship? Do they have any idea what it is? The answer is actually no. Because you meet those guys, like, they don't have a, thanks for on video. I'm not speaking about AOL in particular. They don't have a clue. So that doesn't seem right, okay? That seems wrong to me. So I've been thinking a lot about what do we do about that? So, you know, I do stuff at Harvard Business School where we're just like trying to bring some lean startup ideas into the curriculum there, make it a mandatory part of getting a business education, and that's had a huge impact already, I think. We have to get investors, private equity, public market, I gotta get all these people to start evaluating progress in startups more objectively. and that's not going as well. Getting VCs to adopt innovation accounting or even to pay attention to it has been an excruciatingly difficult battle so far. I got one of Silicon Valley's most famous investors to admit to me that if we could assess progress objectively, that would be really valuable. It was like that, and that's it. I was like, that's the best you can do? He's like, yeah. That's like after an hour of me arguing with him about it. Like, we can't test this proposition, of course, because it's a pipe dream. But if magically somehow you could do it, I'm like, I got a book right here. I laid it out in great detail. No interest. We have to do something about that. And then if you look at our problems at a deeper level, I think a lot of them originate in the public markets. So we celebrate when entrepreneurs get liquid, when they exit. But actually, like, exits are funerals more often than anything else. There's two kinds of exits: the fast death, where you sell your startup to a big company and they ruin it, or the slow death, where you go public and then the corrosive influence of the public markets ruins your company. Right? Those are the two kinds of exits. Why are we celebrating that again? Why is that good? That doesn't make sense to me. And both of those exit problems have their origin in the fact that the public markets are incredibly short-term focused, 100% focused on vanity metrics, and completely anathema to any kind of long-term investments in innovation. Which is why those companies keep doing these pump and dump maneuvers where they buy crappy startups and hype. I mean, like, all these problems trickle up to that basic thing. So the craziest idea I floated in the book, and the reason I know that nobody actually reads books anymore is that, like, if people had stumbled across this, it's in the last chapter, like, more people would be upset at me. I know that from the test readers who I made read the book, you know, who a lot of whom were like, you can't write this kind of stuff, this is insane. So, like, you know, just good, really good for future. If you ever want to, like, beta test an idea in a book, like, just put it in the back and, you know, you'll find out exactly who read the book and who didn't. Is that I think we should be working on a new kind of public market, where we actually create a hospitable environment for startups to go public, where they would be not subject to this kind of short-term shenanigans, not be dominated by the Wall Street, you know, idiots, but where we would actually have different rules for investors and management that would foster long-term trading, long-term thinking on both parts. So, you know, employee and management compensation tied to long-term performance, much higher transaction fees, graduated transaction fees for the longer you hold the stock, and have investors vest into their voting rights in companies. So you can't just, like, replace the CEO, you know, 5 times a year, even if they lie on their resume or whatever. Okay. So, like, the one thing we've learned about these giant companies is that no matter how badly run they are, they take a long time to die. So there's no rush to, like, replace the CEO every 5 minutes. Like, even the worst possible CEO in the world can't destroy the company overnight. So, you know, we got to give management some more time to do stuff. And in exchange for those restrictions, hopefully we could get companies to do a much better job of reporting and disclosing non-vanity metrics, so we could actually figure out who's really investing in a sustainable basis. Anyway, this is one of those, like, really nutty ideas, but anyway, that's what's on my mind at the moment. So
That's great. Really appreciate the transparency, and I think that was fairly informative for everyone.
I hope so.
You know, one last question just from my end, and potentially a selfish one for the room is, you know, in your experience in all your travels, you know, what have you heard of the Canadian technology community? Are we making any waves out of Toronto that are coming out to your ears? I mean, enlighten us, good or bad.
I really feel bad having to close on that note because I can
ask another question.
No, you don't.
Afterwards.
We might need to do another question. We'll see if I even survive the comment. The truth, I get this question actually a lot in a lot of places around the world, and the truth is that people in Silicon Valley are so parochial you wouldn't even believe. So no, we don't hear about anything. We don't pay attention to anything. I mean, like, VC firms in Silicon Valley are, like, just starting to get the memo about China. You guys notice that China is kind of like a big deal? It's like, you know, like, think about, like, you know, India. I hear that globalization is happening in India. Like, really, it just happened just now. Oh my God, we have to invest. I mean, it's like it's actually kind of embarrassing, kind of myopia. So I happen to be friends with a couple of Canadian entrepreneurs who have actually, like, made some waves in Silicon Valley, like Dan DeBow, and I'm so I can never name names on stage. It's the worst. It's the worst thing. Dan Martell, thank God, he's probably here. He's mad at me. Sorry, Dan. I really love you so much. So I, you know, from them hear about stuff in Canada, but that's totally idiosyncratic. If I hadn't, I honestly wouldn't know a thing. So yeah, no. Let's do one more question. I feel bad.
Please.
In New Orleans at Broco, you spoke just before
That was a really funny experience. I've never seen anything like that. I didn't know what Shark Tank was. I actually have never watched it. And he, he speaks with his own DJ. Like had his own like promotional trailer to introduce himself on stage. That was really wild. I was like, I gotta get that. The worst was afterwards. He had a new book out also, and so we're like doing book signings, at parallel tables. Me next to like guy who's on primetime television. So that's like me and my table and like 3 people, and like huge line of people around the block like want to get that picture taken with the guy from TV. So it was a very humbling experience too. To be like, all right, even though what he said made no sense whatsoever, he's on television. Right. Get on television if you want to be famous. So yeah, so like actually it was very reassuring. It's like, this is actually not famous. That's famous. It's like helpful. I mean, what I hear secondhand is that by injecting the idea of entrepreneurship into the public discourse, by putting it on primetime television, that's actually really positive. It's a compared to like The Apprentice or something, even sillier like that. Like it's a positive, version of people getting up on stage and saying, hey, I have an idea that could change the world. So I mean, I think that part of it is very cool. I just wish that the public discourse about entrepreneurs, and this is true on TV as much as it is in our, tech blogs and everything. I just wish it was focused less on pitching investors and more on actually doing work. Because what people don't understand is that the best pitch is no pitch at all. The best pitch is amazing results. And so if you're pitching investors, like when we're talking about how to pitch investors, we're already talking about what to do if you don't have amazing results. So I say, let's just have more amazing results and worry less about how to pitch investors. So if I could kind of wave one magic wand, I want a TV program that actually focus on the actual lives of what entrepreneurs actually do. The problem is it's kind of boring. So I don't know how to solve that problem. If there's a documentary filmmaker in the room who knows, can be in touch. I'd love to figure that out.
Phenomenal. If you were going to point people one way after this, if they were interested in learning more about your own teachings and about other things related to Lean, I mean, what's the best resource for people to access? What's the best thing to do next?
Well, I run the world's best website ever called theleanstartup.com. So you, of course, should check that out. Actually, if I had to choose one thing, I would say get involved with the local Lean Startup scene. So if you go on the Lean Startup Wiki, or there's a worldwide group called Lean Startup Circle, which is a mailing list, you can get connected to, obviously very active Lean Startup community here in Toronto. But wherever you live, I mean, we're now in something like 150 cities. And these are not like corporate events that I organize. Every single one of those groups is 100% grassroots run. And I think that although the ideas around entrepreneurship are global, entrepreneurial practice is necessarily local. And there's no better resource than people who are in the same places, you going through the same things that you're going through, to be part, like I said, of a movement. I really think these organizations, events like this, groups like Lean Coffee, groups like Lean Startup Machine, are the laboratories that are right now, as we speak, advancing the state of the art in entrepreneurship. And so I think of myself as very lucky. I get to be the megaphone for the discoveries that are made in those laboratories, but I'm not confused. This is where the actual work gets done. So I'm incredibly grateful that that's happening, and I just encourage anyone who's interested to get involved.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Eric, I mean, I can't say this enough. Thank you so much for making time for us today. I speak on behalf of our community at large and the people in the room that when I say that your time and attention to the startup community, especially in Toronto, is very valued and very needed. So anything we can do to have you back in the city more often, please let us know. And thank you, everyone, for being great on.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.